Among the restrictions placed on the coverage of Glenn's flight was one which prohibited live or instantaneous broadcast of his voice communications from the space capsule to the tracking stations around the world. However, those communications were recorded, and within minutes they were released by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And from the 5-hour flight, we've attempted to distill some of the more cogent comments, starting with Glenn's communications with Mercury Control at the moment of liftoff.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Liftoff. Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway.
Roger, reading you loud and clear.
Roger, we're programming and roll okay. Fuel 102, 101, oxygen 78, 100, amps 27.
Roger, loud and clear. Flight path is good. 6-9.
Roger, check's okay. Mine was 70 on your mark. There's some vibration area coming up here now.
Roger, reading you loud and clear, John.
With Glenn nearing the Canary Islands, this report about his flight from Colonel John Powers at Mercury Control.
The Friendship 7 spacecraft has passed on its orbital track, has now passed over the Canaries, and is about to establish contact with our tracking station at Kano in Africa. As it passed in the vicinity of the Canaries, John Glenn reported, "I am very comfortable. All systems are okay." He reported that the horizon was a brilliant blue and that he had the Canaries in sight out through his window.
Quite a little bit later, with the first orbit almost complete, another report from Colonel Powers.
As he passed across the east coast of the United States, he reported he had a beautiful view of the coast. He, at that time, could not see the Cape, but expected to do so shortly. He has now passed east of Bermuda, going down the second leg of the second orbit in the Friendship 7 spacecraft.
At this point, Glenn was operating the capsule manually, and a long-awaited announcement from Project Mercury.
In a voice contact broadcast and relayed remotely to the control center, we heard astronaut John Glenn report that he is go for another orbit. Our analysis of the situation at this time is that we are in a go condition. Our flight director, Mr. Chris Kraft, has made a preliminary decision at this time that we are go and will continue the mission.
Now, over the United States, another critical point in the climax of the mission and a tense double check.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire.
Retro fire.
Roger. Retros are firing. Oh, Roger, baby.
DC current Vegas 09.
Feels like I'm going back toward Hawaii.
And then Glenn was down. The carrier and the destroyer were on their way, and a Project Mercury announcement that the world awaited.
The USS Noah indicate the Friendship 7 spacecraft was picked up clear of the water at 1 minute after 3 and finally set down on the deck at 4 minutes after 3 this afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. John Glenn reports, "My condition is excellent."
It appears tonight that over 60 million Americans watched the flight on television and heard those words earlier today. And not the least of these was President John F. Kennedy. Reporters at the White House, by sly glances through the window of his offices in the executive wing, saw Mr. Kennedy peering intently at his television set. It had been agreed with the television industry pool that the president would have some comment to make on the flight when it was concluded. And when Colonel Glenn was picked out of the Atlantic Ocean, the president did appear before our television cameras.
I know that I expressed the great happiness and thanksgiving of all of us that Colonel Glenn has completed his trip, and I know that this is particularly felt by Mrs. Glenn and his 2 children. A few days ago, Colonel Glenn came to the White House and visited me, and he was, as are the other astronauts, the kind of American of whom we are most proud. Some years ago, as a Marine pilot, he raced the sun across this country and lost. and today he won. I also want to say a word for all those who participated with Colonel Glenn at Canaveral. They faced many disappointments and delays. The burdens upon them were great, but they kept their heads and they made a judgment, and I think their judgment's been vindicated. We have a long way to go in the space race. We started late, but this is the new ocean, and I believe the United States must sail on it and be in a position second to none. Some months ago, I said that I hoped that every American would serve his country. Today, Colonel Glenn served his, and we all express our thanks to him.
By this time, tribute was pouring in from around the nation and indeed from around the world. Perhaps the most enthusiastic tribute occurred midway between Columbus, Ohio and Wheeling, West Virginia, in Glenn's hometown of New Concord, Ohio. There, practically all 2,000 residents turned out at the Muskingum College Gymnasium to pray for, worry through, and cheer on the astronaut. The climax to their vigil was the arrival of the Glenn parents, who left their home only after they knew that their son was safe. And this was the scene at that time.
There it is. Mrs. Glenn and John Glenn Sr., a very lovely couple, America's first couple right at this moment. Mrs. Glenn wearing a little black hat. She's wearing an orchid. She's being escorted by President Robert Montgomery of Muskingum College. Bill Cutting, a state patrolman, is going along in front of me here. Mr. Glenn is being escorted by Mayor J.K. Taylor of New Concord. And everyone in this gymnasium at this moment is standing up and applauding as Mr. and Mrs. John Glenn go through the rostrum to begin the news conference on a day that is not only historic for them, but for all of America and all of the free world.
What were your thoughts, and particularly, was there ever a moment when you feared that the flight would not be successful?
That's a hard question to answer, part of it. Feelings are something that you just cannot put into words. But answering the part about wondering about the flight, there never has been a moment since John was chosen for Project Mercury that we had any doubts as to his success when he did take the flight, which was today. And right now, I'm so very, very thankful to God for his safety and for the success of the mission which went today.
Thank you.
Mr. Glenn, John received a good bit of training, 3 years or more, to be able to stand up under all this. You and Mrs. Glenn received none of this training. How have you managed to stand up under the barrage of attention, camera crews and reporters that have been living almost with you for the past 5 weeks or so?
Oh, yeah, we've enjoyed that very much. We've certainly been a wonderful bunch of people. And the first few times that we met the press, I think the first time we went to the door and there was 5 men standing there. And they started to introduce themselves, you know. Well, I can't remember one name, let alone a dozen. I said, well, come on in. As far as I'm concerned, you're all Joneses.
Will you miss all that excitement today?
Pardon me?
Will you miss all that excitement?
Will you miss all the excitement?
Will you miss the excitement?
Oh, I expect we will, yes. We've enjoyed every minute of it. We've spent about 5 weeks every day, maybe 4 or 5 different people each day. And there was one very humorous thing happened. I think the first bunch was there when we were very much excited and had never been in front of the camera before. And I started to make voice recording, pictures. And all once a guy ran out and he says, cut! Well, I thought I'd broke the machine or something. You know, pretty bad way. So the man that had the sound effect out in the kitchen, he said, there's a noise in there. I'm getting a noise. Well, one of the guys looked over at me and said I was playing with that mic cord. He said he had my fingers on the mic cord and I was playing with it. So they started to make another recording, and I just thought it'd be a good joke, so I took my finger and I just scratched about 3 times on the mic, and he says, there's that noise again.
Easily the happiest day in the lives of the Glenn parents. And of course, the same mood prevailed in Arlington, Virginia, home of the astronaut's wife, Mrs. Ann Glenn, and their two children, 16-year-old Dave and 14-year-old Lynn. Despite a large crowd of well-wishers outside the home, the procedure in Arlington was the same as in New Concord. Mrs. Ann Glenn and her children stayed indoors until they knew that the colonel was safe. And then, only then, did they meet with reporters.
This is Martin Agronsky. Mrs. Glenn, her son David, 16, her daughter Lynn, 14, have just come out in front of their home here in Arlington, smiling happily after a long day of tension and stress that has ended so victoriously, so happily, and so wonderfully for them and for everyone here in this neighborhood.
Mrs. Glenn, would you step up?
Mrs. Glenn?
Your statement. How do you feel?
Quiet! There are several things that we would like to say, but I would want everyone to know that this is the most wonderful day for my family, and we're so proud of their father, of the Mercury team, of everyone that's made this such a successful day.
Louder.
Thank you.
Mrs. Glenn, do you have any plans to see your husband in the going south, perhaps? Or will you wait until he comes back here? That's what I want to know.
Well, for the way we feel now, I think we'll wait until they bring him back or wherever they say. We can go see him.
Mrs. Glenn, have you had any chance to talk to him, or do you have any plans to talk to him?
There are no plans now.
Mrs. Glenn, your husband said his condition was excellent. How is yours?
I'm happy. I feel wonderful.
How about you, Lynn?
Proud.
And David Glenn?
I feel just the same.
What do you... David, you tracked this all the way through. Were you in contact, and did you have your dad located all the time?
Well, we had a chart and a stopwatch, and that's what we used.
All right.
And just looked at the stopwatch and looked at the track being the time all marked out along the track the capsule was going to follow. So we just followed it along like that.
And we had two globes, too.
Well, Lynn, according to your calculations, did your father stay on course?
As far as we know, he did. And as far as it turned out, he did, too.
Mrs. Glenn, were you worried very much during the course of the flight?
Well, I think that I probably was some, yes. But then when there's that faith that sort of makes things look like it's going to be fine. And
Mrs. Glenn, you say you had faith and you all prayed immediately after the recovery to demonstrate your belief in God's hand in this flight. Can you tell us anything about how you felt about that from the beginning?
Well, my faith now is the same that it's always been, and I don't believe there would be anything more that I would like to say now. No.
A reaction, somewhat more technical, but one just as happy, a reaction to the Glenn orbital flight was to come several hours later at Cape Canaveral, Florida, when the men who are responsible for Project Mercury gathered to meet with newsmen. And that report is coming up. Now, the battery of NASA officials who direct the flight did not leave their consoles at Mercury Control in Cape Canaveral until Lieutenant Colonel Glenn was down safely. First, there was a debriefing session in the Mercury Control Room, and then a news conference. First up, Dr. Hugh L. Dryden, Deputy Director of NASA. He said this was an historic day, a day we've been looking forward to for 3 years, and then he added these words.
3 years, and all I wanted to say is that this is just the beginning, just the first step. Today, of course, is particularly John Glenn's day, but it is the beginning of an enterprise, the exploration of space that will go for a long time, and not too many years from now, you'll look back at the Mercury capsule as you do on the Wright airplane, and you'll think that this mission, which you've seen today, was a very primitive kind of space mission. Now, the man who has a responsibility in NASA at the top level to plan these missions for the future is Brainerd Holmes, who's sitting to my left.
Thank you, Hugh. I was tremendously impressed with the effectiveness with which this program has been planned and which the engineering was effected and carried out today. I think it's an excellent and major step in initiating our man in space program. A great deal of information was received from today's flight. Much of the information couldn't have been received if there had not been a man on board. I think we have confirmed many of the plans and much of the engineering data in this very practical way by flying a man in this 3-orbit mission. We'll now fly other missions, and more extensive and more complicated missions. And I think just in closing, let me say that I feel this is really a great testimony to the engineering effort of this particular team and to the engineering competence of the men working in space in the United States.
Mr. Shutt.
Question for Dr. Dryden. Obviously, this has shortened the gap in our race with the Russians, and I wondered if you could go into that a little more in detail as to how much it has shortened the gap and when that gap may not exist.
Well, this is very difficult to answer because our Russian friends have been silent for several months now and have still not produced the step forward in their capabilities that may lie ahead. I think it is in the hands of Brainerd and Bob Gilruth, Werner von Braun, when we obtained the Saturn vehicles, C1 and the advanced Saturns, to determine whether we, in their hands and in the hands of what the Russians do, to decide whether we in fact have closed the gap. We have done the orbiting a man 3 times around the Earth, 3 years from the time it was an idea.
Do you project any time?
Mr. Hackus in the far back.
I wonder if Dr. White could tell us a little bit more in detail what the pilot tasks were, how they were carried out, the eating, the drinking, the exercise, and the picture taking, and so on.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the one big task that he carried out was the one that he did so well, that of control. Now, superimposed upon this, during the flight plan, there were a series of tests which got at the eating and drinking that was mentioned. These were phased so that they would be repeated with elapsing segments each orbit. Would allow him to try both solid malt-type pills and also some of the tube feed, liquids, semi-liquids, and paste as a way of finding out whether the upset of the stomach would be the problem that was associated with TTOF. We also programmed with the same periodicity the scheduling of head motions, which would normally get at the inner ear as a trigger mechanism of setting off the nausea that cosmonaut Titov described. Now, during the first 2 orbits, he was able to follow this program very, very closely. During the 3rd orbit, he had to defer some of these to stay with the work that was accumulating for him to do on the automatic control system. We felt this is not a real loss because he obviously was demonstrating the performance that compensated for the small experiments that were scheduled.
Mr. Von Fran.
I guess this should be directed to Walt Williams. I don't mean to beat this bobbling pen to death, but did it cause any momentary consideration of possibly having to destroy the boosters?
Oh, no. As General Rittman pointed out, this had nothing to do with the booster. This is purely a display board, which wiggled.
You never should have mentioned it.
Shouldn't have mentioned it.
Wait a minute. If you were there watching it, why...
Mr. Goulding.
I can say that the plot boards in Mercury Control today showed the smoothest tracking data that I think we've seen on any of our missions.
And so the flight had been made and the initial reactions recorded. John Glenn is still to be honored in Washington, and today's events will probably be remembered fondly by many millions for the remainder of their lives. But this was really a pioneer move today, the first orbital flight by the United States, and what seems phenomenal today will seem less so in the years just ahead of us. There will be more orbital flights, 3 orbital flights in this test series, and the pilot has already been selected for the next one. He is Major Donald Deke Slayton, an Air Force officer, 38, a native of Sparta, Wisconsin. And even now, his Atlas missile is being readied. To get that story and to look further into the future, we go to NBC's Elmer Peterson at General Dynamics Astronautics at San Diego, California.
At General Dynamics, they call this the High Bay area. Nestled in its berth is the next Atlas Mercury Project booster scheduled for delivery to Cape Canaveral. Number 109D, which hurled John Glenn into orbit, was finished in this very same dock. Now 107D is destined to push astronaut Deke Slayton into space, possibly in March. It might be modified slightly depending on what's learned from today's flight, perhaps not. But eventually, boosters like this will become the Model T Fords of space. By 1965, perhaps sooner, with far more powerful boosters, space exploration will be something different. This is a detailed engineering model of a 3-man space station or space laboratory proposed by General Dynamics Astronautics. It stands outside. It now is being used for ground studies, employing men and machines to work out the exact environment that man must take with him into space if he intends to penetrate deeply into space. I am standing on a balcony outside what is known as Compartment 2 of this space station, and inside is Dr. Kraft Ericke, one of this nation's outstanding space scientists and technologists, and now Director of Advanced Planning for GDA. Dr. Ericke, just when, in point of time, do you think a space station such as this will actually be launched in relation to our present space projects?
I believe it will be launched in 1964 or early 1965. However, the launching of a small space laboratory such as this one will have to be preceded by the launching of a somewhat larger Mercury capsule, one for 2 people, such as is known as the Project Gemini, that is presently planned by NASA. But eventually, before we go to the moon, we have to experiment in a space laboratory of a type like you see it here.
Well, you know, it seems like awfully close quarters for a 3-week trip, Dr. Ericke, but I suppose this is the basic idea for spaceships of the future.
Yes, this is true. This station essentially simulates the conditions as the people will experience them on the flight to the moon and back, which takes about 5 days. An interplanetary spaceship will definitely have much larger living quarters.
But now I gather some problems can be worked out in the matter of space environment here in a station of this sort on the ground, but some problems must be solved in space, isn't that right?
Yes, this is very true, Mr. Peterson. For example, zero-G condition as a weightlessness condition, the separation from the Earth, the existence in a vacuum environment have to be tried out with all the exact radiation conditions, with the exact conditions of meteoritic danger and so forth, have to be tried out in orbit. In other words, people have to have flight experience before they can go to the moon.
So we have to go beyond, certainly, the Mercury project before we can go deep into space. Tell me, where do you think the Russians now stand in relation to our progress in space stations of this kind?
Well, this is difficult to assess at the moment. They haven't done anything outwardly during the last few months. The vehicle with which Titov flew is definitely considerably larger than the one than the Mercury capsule itself. The Russians haven't done anything in the recent past. I believe they are now in weightlessness condition, the separation from the Earth, the existence in a vacuum environment have to be tried out with all the exact radiation conditions, with the exact conditions of meteoritic danger and so forth, have to be tried out in orbit. In other words, people have to have flight experience before they can go to the moon.
So we have to go beyond, certainly, the Mercury project before we can go deep into space. Tell me, where do you think the Russians now stand in relation to our progress in space stations of this kind?
Well, this is difficult to assess at the moment. They haven't done anything outwardly during the last few months. The vehicle with which Titov flew is definitely considerably larger than the one than the Mercury capsule itself. The Russians haven't done anything in the recent past. I believe they are now trying to establish a orbital flight with several people on board.
But then we shouldn't be surprised if they do something very shortly.
That is right.
Well, Dr. Ericke, there is some room for optimism, isn't there, despite this Russian progress?
Oh, by all means. After all, we must not lose sight of the main goals in space flight, and the main goal in the near future is a lunar landing. And I don't see us losing this one yet.
And how important is this in relation to the whole space endeavor?
Well, it is a stepping stone to interplanetary flight, and it will be also the stepping stone to a more and higher developed orbital technology between Earth and Moon.
Thank you. Coming from you, Dr. Ericke, that's very encouraging. Elmer Peterson, NBC News, San Diego.
But there are even more fantastic developments just over the space horizon, and we will be looking at some of these in just a moment. As a NASA official said at the post-shot news conference, a few years from now, we will look back on the Mercury capsule and think of it as we do now of the Wright brothers' airplane. With today's major accomplishment under their belts, the scientists have mapped out those next few years with projects of a really futuristic nature. For a closer look at these blueprints for space, here is NBC's Roy Neal at Cape Canaveral.
Today's mission by John Glenn marked the culmination of several years of research and development by the Project Mercury team. In a sense, it also marked a point of beginning for future space flights by U.S. astronauts. Next on the schedule, another 3-orbital attempt with Deke Slayton, astronaut, to take the ride. That should be scheduled in about 60 days if results from today's flight reveal no unexpected problems. If that flight is successful enough, then there will be a period of several months of preparation, followed by an 18-orbit mission, a 24-hour space flight in the Mercury spacecraft. There may be 2 of these long experiments, and that will carry us into next year. In 1963, a larger spacecraft, roughly similar to the Mercury capsules in shape and equipment, will start flying for Project Gemini. Here, the missions begin to get more complex as we start to find out what jobs men can handle in space. Gemini will be launched by the big Titan rocket and will carry a 2-man team. Our present 7 Mercury astronauts will be joined by a new group and will begin the job of training these new men by flying with them. The flights will run from 7 to 14 days in Earth orbit. Using Atlas Agena booster rockets, the Space Administration plans to also put up satellites in a long looping trajectory, and the Gemini teams will attempt to rendezvous, to meet in space, dock, and move away. These experiments, by the way, may provide us with answers that will permit future spacecraft to hook up with refueling tankers in space to take on supplies. This would cut down takeoff weight, allow us to fly with smaller boosters on long-range flights, and could speed up putting a U.S. man on the moon by as much as a couple of years. When the lunar flights do begin, they will be under the work title of Project Apollo, and plans call for a new type of spacecraft. It will be much larger, carry a 3-man team of astronauts, and supplies enough for flights of a month or more. They will fly around the moon first, eventually land on the surface. These Apollo spacecraft may also use wings to land back on Earth instead of the parachutes used for flights like Glenn's today. The lunar landing may take place as early as 1967. And during the 5 years, the brand new Manned Spacecraft Center at Houston, Texas, will perform as headquarters. Present staff there numbers 150, and except for a new administration building, the offices are leased. Land, ranch land, is being surveyed, and much building will begin soon. By June, the staff is expected to number 1,500. Within the year, the presidential budget calls for about 3,000 persons, as the United States gets into full-scale effort for its manned assault on the moon. The flight of John Glenn today was really the end of the beginning for U.S. man in space.
What will happen in the future and what happened today is the special purview of 3 NBC newsmen who have covered Cape Canaveral since the earliest days of the rocket shoots there. and they covered the Glenn flight today firsthand. Well, certainly today's events have been evaluated enough, and it seems we need only ask them now how they feel and what they recollect at the end of a long day. So we go to Cape Canaveral and NBC's Roy Neal.
Well, Frank, it's now been some 22 hours since Herb Kaplow, Peter Hackus, and I arrived here at Cape Canaveral. And in the course of those 22 hours, of course, we've built some very personalized memories. Herb, what comes to your mind along those personal lines?
Well, I remember, Roy, a Japanese reporter from Tokyo's Asahi newspaper telling me that one of the biggest things about today's flight was that it was held in the open. He said that would impress his people considerably. I asked him how much it would impress them if the flight had been a failure, and he said that did not lessen the value of holding these tests in the open. We have now, of course, had 3 manned space flights in the openness of newspaper, magazine, radio, and television, and everybody's been happy primarily because the flights have gone well. We can wonder tonight if someday we do not have success, but have a failure, as sometimes happens in test programs, will that force some of us then to retreat into the refuge of secrecy? We can wonder, and we can hope not.
Peter, what comes to your mind at this moment from this long day?
Well, Roy, today at Mercury Control, Alan Shepard actually admitted to me that he was jealous of John Glenn. Deke Slayton allowed us how he's champing at the bit to get into the astronaut act as well. And flight surgeon Dr. Stanley White said if the Glenn medical figures had been more normal, they'd actually have been abnormal. Pennsylvania's Congressman Fulton said he flew right along on the Glenn mission, a la Walter Mitty. The man in charge of the recovery force, Admiral Chu, with a broad grin on his face, said he credits the whole successful operation to his faithful four-leaf clover and, he said, to the 25,000 hard-working people who helped it out.
There are hard-working people at Pad 14 right now, cleaning up, getting ready for another booster and another flight soon. And one thing that I know my memory will never relinquish are those waits for the weather and things technical, the midnight postponements and the long wait that made Floridians out of so many of us, even some Californians like myself who were here on what we originally believed would be temporary duty. The delays until everything was really ready for the flight, a flight that had to be right, and that President Kennedy referred to when he said it vindicated the decisions made by the Mercury team. The flight was right. Our U.S. man and space programs are well launched now. And on Friday, the President and John Glenn will come here to the Cape to let the team know how well they have done. Roy Neal, NBC News, Cape Canaveral.
And now, as Roy suggested, there remains the plaudits for astronaut John H. Glenn, Jr. President Kennedy plans to fly to Palm Beach, Florida, late Thursday, and then shuttle to Cape Canaveral Friday morning to be part of a ceremony honoring astronaut Glenn. Additionally, Mr. Kennedy will greet Colonel Glenn at the White House next Monday, perhaps next Tuesday morning. That celebration will include a street parade and a reception on Capitol Hill. And today, at the end of the Glenn flight, a special postage stamp commemorating the event went on sale in 300 post offices across the nation. When the word got out, the post offices were swamped. And now how to end? Well, in Grand Rapids, Michigan today, a judge suspended the trial so that those in the courtroom could see the coverage on television. And they all watched dutifully on a stolen television set that was part of the trial evidence against the man on trial. Frank McGee, NBC News. Good evening.
Portions of this program were pre-recorded. Next week at this time, see Kane's 100 with guest star Dorothy Dandridge in her first television dramatic role. And tomorrow night, there's laughter in store on the Bob Newhart Show at 10, 9 Central Time in color here on NBC. This special NBC News report has been brought to you by the Gulf Oil Corporation, producers of more and better energy from oil. This program was produced by NBC News, which is solely responsible for its content. Jack Costello speaking.